When we think about the wealthiest people in history, our minds might drift to modern billionaires, tech moguls, oil barons, maybe a Rockefeller or a Rothschild. We imagine vast fortunes measured in stock portfolios and real estate holdings, wealth that can be calculated and compared. But the richest person to ever walk this earth wasn't European, wasn't American, and didn't live in our modern age of quantifiable net worth. He was a 14th century West African emperor whose wealth was so incomprehensibly vast that when he went on a pilgrimage, he literally crashed entire economies just by passing through. We're talking about Mansa Musa of Mali, a man so phenomenally rich that Time magazine once reported, "There's really no way to put an accurate number on his wealth," though modern historians estimate it at over $400 billion in today's terms. But this isn't just a story about extraordinary wealth, though there's certainly plenty of that. It's about an empire that controlled nearly half of the world's gold supply at a time when gold was the foundation of international commerce. It's about cities like Timbuktu that rivaled anything in medieval Europe, where scholars debated philosophy and astronomy, while their European contemporaries were still emerging from the so-called Dark Ages. And it's about a moment in African history that fundamentally shaped how the medieval world, from Cairo to Paris, understood wealth, power, and the African continent itself. Let me acknowledge something important here. What I'm presenting is drawn from Arabic sources, oral traditions, and modern scholarship. And as with any history from this period, particularly African history filtered through Arab chroniclers, there are gaps and debates. The written sources come primarily from historians like Ibn Battuta, al-Umari, and Ibn Khaldun, alongside local chronicles like the Tariq al-Sudan. Griots, West Africa's traditional storytellers, preserved another crucial layer, though these sometimes conflict with written accounts. This is one interpretation of a complex record. The question we're exploring today: how did a West African empire accumulate wealth that dwarfed all of medieval Europe combined? And what happened to it? The Mali Empire rose to become one of the most powerful states in the medieval world, produced history's wealthiest individual, and then saw that prosperity gradually slip away. So let's trace this arc, from the foundations of Mali's wealth through its zenith under Mansa Musa, to its decline. Before we understand Mansa Musa's wealth, we need to understand the economic ecosystem that made it possible. This begins with geography, and two commodities that might seem almost mundane to us today, but were absolutely fundamental to medieval life: gold and salt. The Mali Empire occupied a uniquely advantageous position in West Africa. To the north lay North Africa and the Mediterranean world, civilizations hungry for gold to mint, into coins, to ornament their religious buildings, to demonstrate their wealth and power. To the south lay the gold-producing regions of Bambouk, Bouré, and later the Akan Forest, areas blessed with some of the richest deposits in the medieval world. Mali sat right in the middle, controlling the trade routes connecting these worlds. It was the ultimate middleman position in one of history's most lucrative trading systems. Now, salt might seem like a strange thing to get excited about in our era of cheap table salt in every kitchen. But in the medieval world, salt was genuinely precious, and in some places, literally worth its weight in gold. In northern Saharan locations like Tagaza and Taoudani, enormous salt deposits could be mined and cut into slabs. This wasn't just any commodity. Salt was essential for preserving meat and fish in a world without refrigeration, for maintaining human health in hot climates where people lost salt through perspiration, for supporting livestock. The gold-producing regions in the south desperately needed this salt. Meanwhile, North African markets craved gold for their expanding monetary systems and growing international trade. Mali controlled both ends of this exchange, or at least the routes between them. Picture the camel caravans that made this work. Enormous processions of hundreds or even thousands of camels traversing one of the world's harshest environments. They'd carry salt slabs southward across the Sahara, a journey that could take months, stopping at oases for water and rest. Then they'd return northward, laden with gold dust carefully measured on small scales, gold nuggets reserved for the Mansa's treasury, along with ivory, enslaved people, and other valuable goods. The Mali emperors positioned officials at key points along these routes to collect taxes on every caravan passing through. They claimed royal monopolies on gold nuggets, the really valuable stuff, while allowing gold dust to be traded more freely. From this strategic position, they grew spectacularly wealthy. The trans-Saharan trade involved ivory, enslaved people, cola nuts, and countless other goods. But gold was the foundation. By the early 14th century, Mali controlled approximately half of the world's gold supply. Mediterranean economies, Italian city-states, the Islamic world, relied on West African gold for coinage. When you see a gold florin from medieval Florence or a dinar from Cairo, the metal likely came from Mali. This wasn't some peripheral player. This was the central bank of the medieval world. Mansa Kankan Musa, or Musa Keita, came to power around 1312 under remarkable circumstances. His predecessor, Mansa Abu Bakr II, had become fascinated by what lay beyond the Atlantic horizon. According to accounts, Abu Bakr commissioned a fleet of up to 2,000 ships and sailed west. He never returned. Whether disaster struck, whether they reached the Americas centuries before Columbus, or whether they simply ran out of supplies, we'll never know. Mansa Musa, serving as deputy while Abu Bakr explored, found himself thrust into power. Unlike his seafaring predecessor, Musa focused on consolidating Mali's terrestrial empire. Over his 25-year reign, he doubled Mali's territory, brought Gao and Timbuktu firmly under control, and transformed Mali into arguably the world's largest and richest empire at that time. Musa maintained an army of around 100,000 soldiers, including 10,000 cavalry. A significant achievement since horses had to be imported expensively from North Africa. This force expanded borders and secured the trade routes vital to imperial economy. But Mansa Musa was also devoutly Muslim, and this devotion would lead to the event that made him famous across 3 continents. In 1324, Mansa Musa undertook the hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca required of all Muslims who are able. Previous Malian rulers had made this journey, but Musa did it in a style that would advertise Mali's wealth to the entire Islamic world. The preparation took years. The numbers vary, but the scale was extraordinary. 60 to 100,000 people in his entourage. Nobles, officials, soldiers, servants, enslaved people. 500 heralds at the front, each carrying a 6-pound gold staff. 80 to 100 camels, each laden with 50 to 300 pounds of gold. 12,000 enslaved people, each carrying 4 pounds of gold. We're talking 12 to 18 tons of gold in the caravan alone. The logistics of moving such a caravan 4,000 miles across the Sahara are staggering. Planning routes through oases, timing travel to avoid extreme heat, maintaining supplies for tens of thousands. This was a moving city traversing a continent. But the journey was just the prelude. The main event came when this golden caravan arrived in Cairo in July 1324. Cairo in 1324 was one of the medieval world's great cities, capital of the Mamluk Sultanate, population around 1 million, a major trade and culture hub. Then Mansa Musa arrived. The initial meeting with Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad nearly caused a diplomatic incident. Musa was so absorbed in religious devotions, he was reluctant to pay the required formal visit. Eventually persuaded, the meeting went well. But what happened next had far more lasting consequences. Mansa Musa and his entourage stayed 3 months. During that time, Musa spent gold extravagantly, gifts to officials, donations to the poor, shopping in bazaars where he vastly overpaid, commissioning mosques. Every Friday, he had a new mosque built wherever he prayed. Some accounts say he gave away 20,000 ounces, 1,250 pounds, of gold in Cairo alone. Here's the problem. Mansa Musa flooded Cairo's market with so much gold, he created a catastrophic inflationary crisis. Gold's value depends partly on scarcity. When supply increases dramatically and suddenly, value decreases. In medieval Cairo, gold wasn't just precious metal, it was currency. When gold became less valuable, prices skyrocketed. The historian al-Umari, writing 12 years later, interviewed Cairenes who still remembered the chaos. One source told him, "This man spread upon Cairo the flood of his generosity. So much gold was current in Egypt that it ruined the value of the money." Gold's value dropped 20 to 25%, and the economy took 10 to 12 years to fully recover. One man, on one journey, destabilized a major medieval commercial center's economy for over a decade. When Musa realized what he'd done, he tried fixing it, borrowing back gold at high interest to remove it from circulation. This worked partially, but when he repaid these loans in one massive payment, he crashed the market again. In one pilgrimage, Mansa Musa crashed Cairo's gold market twice. Was this naive generosity or calculated power move? Some scholars suggest Mansa Musa knew exactly what he was doing, demonstrating that Mali could manipulate gold prices in Egypt's dominant trade center. By showing he could single-handedly affect the economy of one of the medieval world's most powerful states, he was sending a message about Mali's economic leverage. Whether economic warfare or unintended consequence, it worked as spectacular advertisement for Mali's wealth. Word spread throughout the Islamic world, across the Mediterranean, into Europe. But Musa's hajj wasn't just about displaying wealth. He was genuinely devoted to developing Mali's Islamic institutions and intellectual life, and he recruited scholars, architects, and teachers to return with him. This is where Timbuktu transforms from merely a wealthy trading city into a genuine center of learning, rivaling any medieval university. Timbuktu's location near the Niger's northernmost bend made it a natural trade hub, sitting where river routes penetrated deep into West Africa and overland caravan routes crossed the Sahara. Under Musa's patronage, it became something far more significant. He brought back the Andalusian architect Es-Sahili, who designed magnificent mosques, including the Jinguereber Mosque, completed around 1327, which still stands today as a masterpiece of Sudano-Sahelian architecture. That distinctive style using sun-baked mud bricks that has come to symbolize West African Islamic building traditions. But more important than the buildings were the institutions they housed and the intellectual culture they fostered. The Sankore, Jinguereber, and Sidi Yahya mosques formed what became the University of Timbuktu, though it operated quite differently from European universities. Rather than a centralized institution with formal enrollment, it was a decentralized community of scholars, teaching in the mosques and in private homes throughout the Sankore quarter. Students would seek out particular scholars known for their expertise in specific subjects, much like graduate students today might choose universities based on which professors teach there. At its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries, Timbuktu housed 150 to 180 Quranic schools, with an estimated 25,000 students. A remarkable concentration of learning in a city of roughly 50,000 inhabitants. The subjects studied covered the full range of Islamic scholarship and beyond. Quranic studies and Islamic law formed the core curriculum, certainly, but students also studied mathematics, including algebra and geometry. They studied astronomy and astrology. Scholars in Timbuktu tracked the movements of comets and planets with sophisticated observational techniques. They studied medicine, including surgery. There are records of Timbuktu physicians successfully performing cataract operations. They studied chemistry and pharmacology, philosophy and logic, geography and history. The city's scholars debated questions of jurisprudence, compiled biographical dictionaries of learned men, wrote commentaries on ancient texts, and produced original works on everything from governance to grammar. Scholars came from across the Islamic world, from Egypt, from Morocco, from the Middle East, to study and teach. And the flow of knowledge wasn't just one way. West African scholars like Ahmad Baba, who lived in the 16th century and wrote over 40 books on different subjects, produced works studied throughout the Islamic world. There's a wonderful story that circulated about a professor from the Hejaz region of Arabia who came to Timbuktu intending to teach, but after attending lectures and meeting with local scholars and students, he was so humbled by their level of learning that he became a student instead. Whether literally true or not, the story reflects Timbuktu's genuine reputation as a place of serious scholarship. The city developed a thriving manuscript culture that became one of its most profitable industries. Private libraries held thousands of manuscripts, with some wealthy families accumulating collections of over 1,600 manuscripts. The production and trade of books became a major part of Timbuktu's economy. The 16th century traveler Leo Africanus noted that manuscripts were sold for more money than any other merchandise. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of manuscripts written in Arabic and in local languages like Fulfulde, Songhai, and Bambara using the Arabic script. These covered everything from legal treatises to astronomical tables, from medical texts to historical chronicles, from mathematical problems to mystical poetry. Around 285,000 of these manuscripts survive today, an invaluable record of Islamic and African intellectual history that scholars are still working to fully catalog and study. Mansa Musa's hajj made him famous in the Islamic world, but reaching Europe took longer. When it came, it arrived through one of the most influential maps of the medieval period, the 1375 Catalan Atlas, created by the Jewish cartographer Abraham Cresques and his son for Charles V of France. This sophisticated map represented the cutting edge of medieval geographical knowledge, showing the known world with remarkable detail and accuracy for its time. And there, prominently displayed in West Africa, sits Mansa Musa. He's depicted enthroned in regal splendor, wearing a golden crown, holding a golden scepter in one hand, and examining a golden nugget in the other, looking every bit the fantastically wealthy emperor that stories described. The accompanying text reads in Catalan, "This Negro lord is called Musa Meli, lord of the Negroes of Guinea. So abundant is the gold in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." It's worth noting that medieval European concepts of race were different from modern ones, but the language here still reflects the beginning of racialized thinking that would later justify colonialism. This map was hugely influential in shaping European understanding of Africa. It circulated among European courts and merchant houses, was copied and referenced by later cartographers, and fundamentally changed how Europeans imagined West Africa. Before this, Europeans had only the vaguest notions about what lay south of the Sahara. Rumors of gold, certainly, but little concrete knowledge. Now they had a specific image: a powerful, organized empire ruled by a king whose wealth rivaled or exceeded that of any European monarch. This wasn't just interesting geographical information, it was economically significant intelligence about a source of gold at a time when European economies desperately needed the precious metal for expanding trade and minting coinage. The image of Mansa Musa on this map helped spark a European obsession with reaching West African gold that would have profound consequences. Portuguese explorers in the 15th century, Italian merchants, Spanish adventurers, they all had this image in mind, this vision of African wealth waiting to be accessed. In a very real sense, Mansa Musa's spectacular display of wealth in 1324 and its representation on the Catalan Atlas 50 years later helped launch the European exploration of Africa that would eventually lead to colonization. At Mali's height, under Mansa Musa, around 1325–1337, the empire controlled roughly 400,000 square miles, comparable to the Mongol Empire. It stretched from the Atlantic coast to beyond the Niger Bend, from the Sahara to the forest regions, encompassing multiple climates, ethnic groups, languages, and economies. Wealth came from multiple sources: the gold trade, copper mining, salt trade, cola nuts, ivory, enslaved people, and Niger Valley agriculture. Taxes, tribute from vassals, and royal monopolies filled the treasury. Musa invested strategically in infrastructure, maintaining a large army, establishing systematic administration with appointed provincial governors, and promoting literacy and scholarship. By his death around 1337, Mali had transformed from a regional power into an empire of global significance. Maintaining an empire requires more than wealth. It requires strong leadership, effective administration, and the ability to respond to challenges. After Mansa Musa's death, Mali struggled with all of these. Musa was succeeded by his son, Maghan Ferfer, who ruled only about 4 years. The sources suggest he was weak, unable to command his father's respect and authority. He was replaced by Mansa Suleiman, Musa's brother, whose reign from 1341 to 1360 continued Mali's golden age. This is when Ibn Battuta visited and left us detailed eyewitness accounts. But after Suleiman's death in 1360, things unraveled. What followed was a succession of weak rulers, palace coups, disputed successions, and civil wars between royal family factions. This internal instability was catastrophic for an empire depending on strong central authority to hold together diverse territories. The problem was structural. Mali lacked a clear, formalized succession system. Power passed within the Ibn Keita royal clan, but ambiguity existed about exactly who should inherit: son, brother, nephew. Without a strong ruler to impose order, these disputes could tear the empire apart. And that's what happened in the late 14th century. While Mali was distracted by internal conflicts, external threats multiplied. The Mossi to the south raided territories and disrupted commerce. Saharan Tuareg peoples reasserted independence and raided northern routes. But the most serious threat came from the east, the Songhai. The Songhai, once Mali's subjects centered on Gao, never fully accepted Mali's rule. As Mali's grip weakened, Songhai reasserted independence under capable leaders. In 1433–1434, the Tuareg captured Timbuktu, that great symbol of Mali's wealth. 3 years later, they took Oualata. Mali lost the northern trade routes and the commerce that funded imperial power. In 1465, Songhai captured Mema. By 1468, under Sunni Ali, Songhai took Timbuktu and began building what would become an empire eventually dwarfing Mali. So what happened to all that gold? Where did this seemingly inexhaustible fortune disappear to? This is more complex than it seems, because wealth in a medieval empire wasn't like money sitting in a bank account that can simply vanish. Part of the answer is that Mali's wealth was always more about flow than about storage. The empire's prosperity came from controlling and taxing trade, not from having enormous hoards of gold sitting in vaults. When Mali lost control of the trade routes, when Timbuktu fell to the Tuareg, when Songhai took Gao, when the Mossi disrupted the southern routes, the flow of wealth dried up. The gold didn't vanish into thin air. It simply started flowing through different channels, enriching different kingdoms, filling different treasuries. It's like controlling a river. The water keeps flowing, but if you lose control of the dam, you lose the ability to harness its power. There's also what economists call the resource curse, the paradox where countries rich in natural resources often struggle to develop sustainable economies. Mali's wealth was based almost entirely on extractive resources: gold from mines, salt from deposits, ivory from elephants. These are valuable, yes, but they're ultimately finite and dependent on maintaining physical control over specific locations. When you lose control of the mines or the trade routes, you lose the wealth, because it was never really yours in any fundamental sense beyond the ability to control access to it. Compare this to the wealth of, say, the Italian city-states of the same period. Venice and Florence and Genoa grew rich through manufacturing, producing textiles, glass, and luxury goods, and through banking and financial services that created value rather than just extracting and trading it. Their wealth was based on human skills, institutional knowledge, and commercial networks that couldn't easily be taken away. A Venetian merchant family might lose their warehouses, but keep their trading relationships and commercial expertise. A Malian Mansa, who lost control of the gold fields, had lost the very foundation of his wealth. That kind of extractive wealth is inherently more fragile, more vulnerable to the fortunes of war and politics. Internal instability and weak rulers also burned through resources. A strong government makes strategic investments generating returns over time. A weak government in civil conflict wastes resources on internecine warfare rather than productive investment. But there's a larger story about global economic shifts. In the late 15th century, Portuguese explorers sailed down Africa's Atlantic coast, establishing direct maritime trade. This created alternatives to trans-Saharan routes that were Mali's prosperity bases. Coastal kingdoms could now trade gold directly with Europeans, bypassing Saharan middlemen. In 1471, Portuguese established trading presence near southern gold fields, the Portuguese Gold Coast, modern Ghana. Gold that flowed north through Mali now increasingly flowed south to European ships. Trans-Saharan trade continued for centuries, but declined in relative importance. There's tragic irony here. Mali's wealth came from West African gold, but European demand for that gold fueled European exploration and colonization. Mansa Musa's spectacular 1324 hajj helped spark European interest in finding direct routes to that wealth. But here's what's remarkable. Mali didn't just collapse. Even after losing northern territories, even after Songhai's emergence, Mali persisted. The empire contracted to its Mandinka heartland, but survived. In 1542, Songhai tried conquering what remained and failed. In the late 16th century, after Morocco destroyed Songhai in 1591, Mali briefly tried reclaiming former territories. Not until 1599, after a devastating defeat outside Jenne, were Mali's restoration hopes extinguished. Even then, Mali didn't disappear. It fragmented into smaller chiefdoms, but the Keita dynasty and Mali's memory continued. The last Mansa, Mahmud Keita IV, died in 1610, nearly 4 centuries after Sundiata Keita founded the empire. So we return to our question: what happened to Mali's wealth? The answer is complicated because we're really asking several questions. The physical gold dispersed, funding Mali's wars until it fell, flowing to conquerors and successors like Songhai, Moroccans, coastal kingdoms trading with Europeans. Gold is ultimately just an exchange medium. It goes where power and trade go. Mali's economic infrastructure, trade route control, political authority, taxation ability, was lost through internal weakness and external pressure. Other powers inherited Mali's commercial network. Songhai expanded it. Moroccans tried controlling trans-Saharan trade from the north. Coastal kingdoms developed European trade relationships. Mali's intellectual and cultural legacy survived, though precariously. The manuscripts are still studied. The mosques still stand. Griots still tell stories of Sundiata and Mansa Musa, keeping Mali's memory alive. The bigger question, why did such a wealthy, powerful empire decline over 2 centuries, is really about empire itself, about wealth and power relationships, about state resilience or fragility. Enormous wealth didn't prevent decline. Vast gold reserves didn't protect against internal dysfunction and external threats. Control of irreplaceable resources didn't guarantee prosperity. This suggests wealth alone isn't enough. Sustainable power requires effective institutions, legitimate succession, investment in productive capacity, military capability, and ultimately adaptability to changing circumstances. Mali struggled with all of these after Mansa Musa. Succession crises, internal conflicts, inability to maintain control, failure to adapt when new routes and powers emerged, these caused decline. Wealth was a means to an end, a tool for maintaining power. When institutions and leadership eroded, wealth alone couldn't save the empire. There's something important about how we remember Mali and Mansa Musa. For a long time, Europeans either ignored Mali or treated it as a curiosity. The dominant narrative claimed sub-Saharan Africa had no history, no civilization, no achievements before European colonization. This wasn't just ignorance, it was ideological, justifying colonialism and slavery. Mali's story contradicts all of that. Here was an empire rivaling anything in medieval Europe in wealth, territory, and cultural sophistication. Here was Mansa Musa, whose wealth and power exceeded any European monarch of his time. Here was Timbuktu, whose libraries and scholars matched or exceeded Europe's intellectual centers. This wasn't an anomaly. This was part of Africa's long history of state-building, commerce, and intellectual achievement that has often been systematically ignored or devalued. All in all, Mali and Mansa Musa's story is about wealth, certainly, but also much more. It's about how geography and resources create power opportunities. It's about how strategic trade control builds empires. It's about how individual rulers shape history. Mansa Musa's hajj really did change how the medieval world understood West Africa, for better and worse. It's about how institutions and succession matter as much as wealth in maintaining power. And it's about how empires rise and fall, how prosperity can be transient, how historical greatness doesn't guarantee perpetual dominance. The Mali Empire was extraordinary. It controlled unprecedented wealth. It produced history's richest individual. It created one of the medieval world's great learning centers. And then, like all empires, it declined, contracted, and dissolved into smaller kingdoms. But the legacy persists, in manuscripts still studied, in architectural traditions still visible, in stories still told, and in the knowledge that African civilization has rich, complex history rivaling anything in human experience. So anyway, that's the story of Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire, the rise, the spectacular peak, and the gradual decline. As always, this is a working interpretation based on available sources, and I'm sure there are aspects I've oversimplified. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you make of Mansa Musa's Hajj? Brilliant publicity or naive generosity? What were the key factors in Mali's decline? And what does Mali's story tell us about wealth and power more generally? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.